In 1967, Dr. King presented a talk to the leaders and members of SCLC. And that talk was titled, "The Crisis in America's Cities, an analysis of social disorder and a plan of action against poverty, discrimination, and racism in urban America." This address was made August 15th, 1967, in Atlanta, Georgia, 4 years after the famous "I Have a Dream" speech on the Washington Mall. Let us listen to his words and reflect. Dr. King said, "A million words will be written and spoken to dissect the ghetto outbreaks, but for a perceptive and vivid expression of culpability, I would submit 2 sentences written a century ago, at that time, by Victor Hugo." And he quoted Mr. Hugo in these words, "If the soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness." End quote. Dr. King goes on to say, "The policy makers of the white society have caused the darkness. They created discrimination. They created slums. They perpetuate unemployment, ignorance, and poverty. It is incontestable and deplorable that Negroes have committed crimes, but they are derivative crimes. They are born of the greater crimes of the white society. When we ask Negroes to abide by the law, let us also declare that the white man does not abide by law in the ghettos. Day in and day out, he violates welfare laws to deprive the poor of their meager allotments. He flagrantly violates building codes and regulations. His police make a mockery of the law. He violates laws on equal employment and education and the provisions for civil services. The slums are the handiwork of a vicious system of the white society. Negroes live in them, but do not make them any more than a prisoner makes a prison." Dr. King went on to say, "Let us say it boldly, that if the total slum violations of law by the white man over the years were calculated and were compared with the law-breaking of a few days of riots, the hardened criminal would be the white man." He went on to say the second major cause of the crisis in the inner cities is unemployment, because it furnishes the bulk of the shock troops. Government figures reveal that the rate of unemployment for Negroes runs as high as 15%, and some cities, and for youth, up to 30 and 40%. It is not accidental that the major actors in all the outbreaks were the youth. with most of their lives yet to live, the slamming of doors in their faces could be expected to induce rage and rebellion. This is especially true when a boastful nation, while neglecting them, gloats over its wealth, power, and world preeminence. Yet, almost 40% of Negro youth waste their barren lives standing on street corners. Has anything changed? My dear President Obama and black people, in 50 years, has anything really changed? Dr. King went on to say, the third cause of what is going on in the inner city is discrimination, which pervades all experiences of Negro or black life. It pushes the Negro off the economic ladder after he has ascended a few rungs. It stultifies his initiative and insults his being. Even the few Negroes who realize economic security do not attain respect and dignity because on upper levels, discrimination closes different doors to them. Discrimination is a hellhound that gnaws at Negroes in every waking moment of their lives to remind them that the lie of their inferiority is accepted as truth in the society dominating them. And the fourth cause, Dr. King went on to say, of the condition of the inner cities is the war in Vietnam. He said, Negroes are not only conscripted in double measure for combat, but they are told the billions needed for remaking their lives are necessary for foreign intervention. Democracy at home is starved to seek a spurious democracy abroad. Dictators, oligarchies are given our resources to perpetuate their rule at the rate of $80 million per day, but we cannot afford to spend 10% of this on anti-poverty programs. There has never been an American war opposed by so many. Opposition has now ascended to a clear majority of Americans and merges with the overwhelming majority of the world. The immoral, insane pursuit of conquest against the will of the people has to diminish respect for government. Among those deprived by government, the disrespect degenerates into contempt and cynicism. In testifying before the Senate last December, Dr. King said, "The bombs in Vietnam explode at home. The security we profess to seek in foreign adventures, we will lose in our decaying cities." And what is the respect level of government today? The respect level of the government of the United States has gone down, the Congress to 14%, the President to 35 to 40%, the Supreme Court less than that. This is the Dr. King that was murdered 1 year later. This is the Dr. King that saw the hypocrisy hypocrisy of America. This is the Dr. King that is memorialized in a statue on the mall, frozen in stone like Lincoln and Jefferson and Washington. But the words of Lincoln are in history for the American people to feed on. The words of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington are also in books for the American people to feed on. But the American people are feeding on a dream speech from Dr. King and missing the point of the hypocrisy of a promissory note that yet remains unfulfilled. This is the Dr. King that was assassinated. Well, should out of this march President Obama pursue a jobs bill? Remember the words of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad: America cannot create enough jobs for her own white unemployed. The present proposed jobs bill was only to create approximately 3 million jobs. But there are over 20 million Americans now that have no jobs or minimal jobs. So how will that jobs bill help us when we are last hired and first fired? We have to think beyond government. Of course, government has a responsibility. But we have to come up with the plan to end our own suffering and help ourselves. Then seek government's help. But we can do it from the $1.1 trillion that we get out of the American economy if that money were utilized properly.